My name is Bogdan Atanasov. I teach prehistoric archaeology at the new Bulgarian University on behalf of the Balkan Heritage Foundation and the Department of Archaeology at the new Bulgarian University. I would like to welcome you to Dr. Bisserka Gaydarska's lecture, Trypillia Megasites from the 4th Millennium BCE in the Ukrainian Forest Steppe. Can a single site tell us something about early urbanism? If someone gets interested in such questions, she or he will soon encounter the scientific work of our speaker today, who is one of the leading theoretical prehistoric archaeologists of old Europe. Already in her PhD dissertation, Landscape, Material Culture, and Society in Prehistoric Southeast Bulgaria, defended at Durham University and published in 2007, Bisserka offered an important alternative to the prevailing ceramic-based cultural historical approach, while shifting the emphasis to settlement archaeology. And I believe that in today's lecture, we will have the chance to realize how experienced settlement archaeologist Bisserka Gaydarska and her project partners are. In the 13 years following the publication of her PhD, Bisserka has produced more than 40 quite important texts in edited books and high-ranked journals. The topics she writes, often in co-authorship with Professor John Chapman, are quite various, such as surface collections, fragmentation of objects and landscapes, the Copperage necropolis of Varna, and of course, the Trypillia megasites and the question of urbanism. I like very much Bisserka's writings because whatever the topic, the time period, or the geographical area is, there is always a common denominator. Her texts are extremely human, insofar biographies, life cycles, and personhood have a central place. If someone is also fascinated by these topics, I would warmly recommend Bisserka's online class, Archaeology of Identity, which he offers in our online graduate program. It is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Bisserka Gaydarska.
Thank you very much. Now I have to share my screen, yes?
Yes.
Okay, share. And probably I should do, nope, I probably should stop share and do something. Just give me a minute. That's probably better. Can you see now?
Yes. Yes.
Why does it not work if I, yes.
Yes.
Yes, can you see all of you?
Yes, everything.
Yeah, okay. So thank you so much. You're making me blush, really. Put a lot of pressure on me now, but thank you very much for this presentation. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present our research, which has lasted for 10 years or so. And I have to admit that this kind of format is a bit constraining for me, because whoever knows me and he's seen me present knows that I usually write to pace up and down and wave my hands. And this is really constraining. So if I, in certain points, seem incoherent, that is because I'm trying to really look at the screen, which is a very weird experience for me. So now, rather immodestly, I will start with the award ceremony of the Shanghai Archaeology Forum in 2015, where our project was awarded as one of the top 10 projects between 2013, field projects between 2013 and 2015. And I'm doing that not because we are immensely proud to be given that award, and because probably this is the closest any archaeologist will get to the pomp and circumstance of an Oscar-like ceremony. But because in a quiet time between ourselves, in a reflection, we are saying, why we're really getting this award? Why were we awarded? And our answer to ourselves is that this is an appreciation of how incredibly difficult it is to investigate huge sites. Every archaeological site presents its challenges, make no mistake about it. But what I'll try to convey today, and what I really think is that why we got that award, is that we really need to think how to approach such sites. what research questions to ask, what methods to use, what objective to have, what methods to use to reach these objectives. And this is why we think we were really awarded. So what I'm going to do today is to give you a brief introduction to Trypillia archaeology, because I've seen that you come from all corners of the world, so therefore I don't expect you to know much about it. I'll spend a bit more time about, a quite chunk of that talk will be about the Neolithic project. And just to stand true to my to the title, I'll try to the end to ask the question again, can I really try to invite you to think in a different way about early urbanism in the view of what you've just seen. So to position ourselves in the world, the Trypillia network is a vast network. It's about 250,000 square kilometers, and it is spread over 3 modern countries in Ukraine, Moldova, and Romania. It is called Trypillia in Ukraine, and you probably, if you go in the literature, you will see the word Trypillia, and this is the Russian word, but I much prefer to use the local one. While in Moldova and Romania, it is called Cucuteni. And although in this vast area, the material culture is is broadly similar, although there are a lot of variants around, it is really, you can recognize that this is indeed the same phenomenon. The one difference that there is in that huge, vast area is that in Moldova, in Ukraine, at certain point, very big sites start to appear, while in Romania, it is really the dispersed settlement model is followed throughout the whole network. So let's just position in time. Well, this is not only vast in terms of territory, but it's also very long-lasting. One of the long-lasting, the most long-lasting networks, prehistoric networks in Europe. It starts around 5000 BC and goes all the way to 2700, 800 BC. And in the brink of the 4000 BC here, these are when these big, huge sites start to appear. So again, very quickly, what does Trypillia actually is? So probably 90% of what we know about Trypillia, the Trypillia group comes from settlements. Cemeteries do appear, but they appear towards the tail end of the network. So really most of Trypillia archaeology is a settlement archaeology. And what you see on the little, and these little beautiful house models is mostly what we find in archaeological record. And what you see on the left is how archaeologists have been reconstructing what they have been digging. And these 2 little beauties are the 2 experimental houses that we built, our project built in the village of Nebelivka. This is a very beautiful and wonderful story that I can talk about these 2 houses for a very long time. I'm very happy to answer all the questions you may have in the discussion, but for the time being, I'm just presenting you with the idea about this, what the Trypillia houses may look like. And what we know about the Trypillia houses, that they were burned after being abandoned at the end of their life cycle. If I have to summarize in one word what is the material culture of Trypillia, that will be a world of clay. This is not to say that there are no stone, flint, bone, but the amount of these other materials is really dwarfed by the amount of pottery, including the houses, which are the wattle and daub. And they mainly come in the shape that you see at the screen, in figurines, beautiful figurines, but mostly in the most exquisite pottery production. And whenever I'm invited to give that talk, I always put that pot, which is a Scantea pot, which is in Romania. I have to say that it's a Cucuteni pot. It's not a Trypillia pot, but nevertheless. And this is one of my favorite pots because apart from being exquisitely produced, look at the decoration. And you can see that there is a 3-way symmetry here, left to right, back to front, and top to bottom. And that kind of symmetry is really achieved only millennia later by Escher. Exquisite. We are talking about the mid-5th millennium BC. So if I have to give you a very brief Kuhnian view of how the Trypillia group has been studied, which is to say, innovation, calm innovation, that kind of cycles. We start obviously with the romantic view of the Trypillia sites, which have been discovered as early as the 1980s. And of course, that follows of a very, very long period of excavation of sites and mainly settlements. And this is how they look like. This is the pattern, the way the excavations are conducted in Ukraine, that you have to open a huge area, extended area over what is believed to be a house, and it is called Plashotka. And the way it is excavated at the time, in between the 1890s to 1870s, is pretty much the same even now. This is the site of Volodymyrivka, and this is also the site of Volodymyrivka, and this marks the second period of the second period of innovation in Trypillia archaeology, which really confirms the existence of megasites. They have been suspected before. They were known that perhaps there were really these huge sites before, but really the proof really came with the granddad of modern geophysics, which is the picture that you see on the left, and what you see on the right is an interpretative image of aerial photography. So after that period, of course, followed the excavations of megasites themselves, in which the major planning principles were established. And from 2007 onwards, it is really sees this is the time of many international projects in which there are many interdisciplinary investigations are taking place, and the geophysics is one of the major activity in these projects. So which are these planning principles that they have been discovered early on? So each of these, I mean, can you see if I move my, yes, can you see that? Right, so each of these little blobs represent a house. So we knew that there is a concentric circles made of houses. We also knew that there is this empty space in the middle. And if you probably just can make they're like making a row of houses. So we knew that there is something which we call radial street. So there are some streets going inwards. And we also managed to see that there is a empty space between the concentric circles. And of course, this has been interpreted in the view that the only way this can be achieved is if there is some hierarchical control of space. So what else did we know before we started our project? So if you look at the early literature, and most of the bulk of the literature, which is in Ukrainian and Russian, good luck, is that it's really mainly discussing population estimates, economic aspects, and even earlier on, but most of them, they tend to interpret these huge sites as farming villages. In 1980s, a very small group of Ukrainian scholars have started to suggest that perhaps we can start talking, we can see and think about the proto-towns and proto-cities, but that remains a very unpopular idea till very day in Ukraine. And despite, it doesn't really matter whether you believe this is a village or a proto-town, everything was explained with migration. They were created by migration and they were abandoned because of migration. So if I have to sum up, the standing position for these sites till this very day is that these are long-term, permanently occupied central places with many thousands of people living together at the same time. And for the site that I've just showed you in the previous slide, Magnetskoye, estimates of 46,000 people have been given. Since then, that figure has been revised several times. But even so, the number of people that still are calculated for that site reach about 30,000. And perhaps this is the moment here that I would like to remind you that in 15th century Europe, there are only 18 cities with a population that is above 40,000. So these are the times when Europe actually reaches that kind of numbers. And we are talking about the 4th millennium BC. This map really belongs in the next section, because this is a map that has been produced by the PhD of our project, Marco Nebbia. But I wanted just to give you the sense of what is the distribution of Trypillia sites. This map has 499 sites, although we know that if you go into the literature, there are many more Trypillia sites mentioned. Even some of them some of the estimates are rather bold, between 5,000 and 7,000 sites. But the way we were set up a very serious criteria in which we wanted to make sure that indeed the site that we want to put on that map, we know where it is really located. We wanted to know its site. So there were a series of criteria to which we wanted to make absolutely sure to make that dot on the map. That's why there is discrepancy with what you can see and what you may know from the literature. And in central universe is the star, which is the Nebelivka. So, going back to my initial slide, and when I said that it was crucial to define our research objectives in the beginning of our projects, and no disrespect to my wonderful Ukrainian colleagues, but digging 1 or 2 plощадки per year was not going to get us anywhere. So therefore, we decided that we really needed an accurate settlement plan of Nebelivka. We also wanted to find out, really, is there contemporary occupation and what is the scale of that contemporary occupation? And of course, it was crucial to put Nebelivka in its micro-regional context and a wider settlement context. We wanted to see if such sites, such big sites, what kind of impact they would have on the environment. And of course, taking a migration into account, we wanted to see why these sites appeared, disappeared, and how did they grow. And of course, giving the idea that it may be, we're talking about early urbanism, see how they fit in that the whole picture of urbanism, in global urbanism in the world. That 7th objective was not in our original project design, but it came to us that we are increasingly finding it difficult to understand the taxonomy of what we were digging. And we were not happy with the answers that we were getting. And therefore, the best way to find out if you're interested in something is build, burn, excavate. And this is and that's what we actually did. And we got very interesting results. And just to lighten up the mood, that's our life in Ukraine. And this is the school in which we were staying. This is the project van called Jupi that we were driving every season from UK to the Ukraine. And you can see the cows blissfully grazing on the outskirts of site. And one of the member of the audience will recognize that, because we were digging there for 2 years with her. And this is the chapel. There is a small chapel in the village, and this is the inside of the chapel. Now, this slide basically summarizes my 10 years of my life. And very quickly, I'll just highlight some of this. So for 6 years of field work seasons, we did almost 300 hectares of geophysics. We found almost 1,500 structures and 850 pits. We excavated almost 3,000 square meters, and we also achieved about 100 days, or we dated for various reasons about 100 days. We also walked 75 hectares of intensive field walking, but less at extensive field, like a linear feature in the linear valleys and of extensive survey. We did 174 square kilometers. We did 5 sediment cores, but only one of which actually we further investigate. We followed up in investigation. We found almost 37,000 sherds, and half a ton of those we studied. The whole team studied individually a half ton of sherds. And all of these, and there is a lot of the site documentation that is deposited currently on the Archaeological Data Service platform in University of York, beg your pardon. And this is a free access. You can, if you're interested, you can go and click. If you want to see the t-shirts, that's your place, and go and see them. So again, quickly, what are our results in a nutshell? This is how a geophysics plan looks like, and perhaps you can't see very much. It's difficult for the eye, so therefore I'll help you with a little bit with an interpretative plan of the same geophysics plan. So what did we find? First of all, we found this little fellow here, which is this ditch, which we didn't know that before that geophysics, we didn't know that there are ditches around. We also found a paleo channel here. Previously, there was probably, it was suspected that maybe there is unburned and less burned houses, but we are surely documented that majority of the houses were burned. 2/3 of the houses were burned, but there are also 1/3, which is quite a lot. If you probably just can manage that, the bright red is the burned and the not so burned purple. So we found this. To our surprise, we found bigger than usual houses, which we called assembly houses. It's one of them here, one of them here, one here, and all 24 of them. We also found pit clusters, which on this scale we probably not be able to see, but some of the next slides will have some. Again, we confirmed the bounded unbuilt spaces, which we knew from before, this one here. But what we also found is neighborhoods and quarters. So that's, for example, this is an example of a neighborhood. The quarters we defined on the basis of 9 criteria. I really don't have time to go on these 9 criteria, but the geophysics captured a really, really enormous anomaly, weight 6 meters long. That's unburnt, this is really unburnt. So if you include the unburnt part, it's 56 meters long and 20 meters wide. And I'm showing this is the reconstruction that you have seen on the advertising poster, but I'm showing this here again, and I would like to underline that if you go outside and you can find other reconstructions of the same structure, and the reason that we reconstructed it the way you see it, and which is to say that this is roofed here, this is that part here, that's how it's roofed here. And because looking at the plan, this is the plan of the megastructure, we couldn't see how any way that will be covered, that area will be roofed, and therefore that's why that area is an open courtyard. And these things here are so-called altars. This is a fired clay bin with a grinding stone inside. Apart from these, obviously, apart from its size, apart from this concentration, this feature, what we found is inside was really disappointing. We had one very small gold hair ornament and a set of 21 miniature pots. But apart from that, bog standard Trypillia assemblage. We were expecting much more, but that's what we got. We were very surprised. So, being a big site, you would expect that there will be some sites around to support such a big site. Or so we thought. That was the initial presumption. So what was our surprise that after years of walking, that hinterland simply did not materialize. It is not that we didn't find any sites. Of course, we were finding sites even in the vicinity of Neolivka, but they were not the sites that we were looking for. We were looking for Trypillia B2 sites. And the closest contemporary site is here. It's 7.5 kilometers to the south of site. And the others are later and they're far away. So this is the site of Volodymyrivka that I have been showing you, and I'll show you even more of that. So a lot of our project was concerned with remote sensing. and control collection, because if you remember when I was showing you the big map and said that you have, we had criteria to include a given site in that. So that was one of criteria to know really the size of the site. And it has been expressed in the Ukrainian literature that the size of the megasites have been exaggerated, and there is a member in the audience who has actually written about it. So we thought that there is indeed overestimation of site, but we wanted really to check it out. So this is again the site of Volodymyrivka. And as you can see, probably this is a satellite photo, and you can probably just get it. That's where the satellite photo finishes, and just be enhancing it here to make it more clear. So these are the boundaries of the site. And when we went there and did some grid collection, this is what we found. So this, the pottery, so if quote unquote, the pottery, if it's within the site, it finishes here. And all the rest is actually pottery scatter, which goes beyond it. It could be plowed, it could be for many other reasons, could have been outside. So this is an offsite scatter. But if you read the literature, the size of the site will be up to here. So basically, we were just trying to figure out what would be the offset in these possible estimates. One of the greatest disappointments of our project is that despite our best efforts, we couldn't really get to the bottom of we couldn't create an internal chronology of the site. We couldn't say which part got easier or later despite our basic modeling. And it is because of the nature of the calibration curve, which you see on the screen. So we know when the site existed, we can read the brackets of it, but not really which part which structure may have been earlier than other. And this is really still causes me a bit grief. Not a disappointment, but total surprise was that when we actually looked at one of the sediment core, there was absolutely no human impact on the scale that we were expecting. Big site, we were expecting huge things to happen in that. None of that. And of course, another huge shock that we also had when we built our house and then we burned it, that we actually needed more wood to burn the structure, to burn the house, than to build it. Now, so I very quickly try to summarize what the Bisserka project was for 10 minutes now. But for us, for 6 years, so day in, day out, we will live with that, with these things coming to us as a surprise, as a disappointment, as a discovery, as a revelation. Very slowly, we started to see that there is a contradiction between our assumptions, between the general narrative, between the model that we are led to believe is happening with these sites and what we were finding on the ground. I'll discuss very briefly just 3 aspects of that contradiction, because otherwise we'll be here all day, all night. And these aspects that we really felt compelled that we need to think critically about. So the standard version is in red, and the following slide is kind of our reflection on what we were thinking during our project. So starting with the Bisserka plan, obviously, what is, large size, of course, means large population. What else? And of course, such planning such layout can only be achieved by if there is advanced planning and control. And the only settlement, the only social structure that can assure that, if there is some kind of hierarchy to impose that kind of top-down control of space. However, if you zoom in, and that's probably the first time that I'm zooming into the plan, you see that the picture is far messier and much more, look at this, there is kinks here in that one. There are kinks here. Look at these things going next to each other or sort of butting each other. There is a lot of things that suggesting to us that perhaps we can more readily speak about cumulative development. And again, these are our neighborhoods, which I helpfully circled for you. And these are the bounded spaces and the pits that I mentioned earlier, just to point out to see. And as you can see, these neighborhoods, some of them are linear. Some of them are organized around a square. And you can see the number of houses. Some of them quite just few, some of them have quite a lot. So there was too much variability to make us feel comfortable with a top-down advanced planning. It was really screaming and shouting at us that perhaps we are seeing some bottom-up development. So once we realized that there is temporality that they have previously missed and is not understood, we started to think about houses, or plashatki, as they're called in Russian and Ukrainian. And as I've mentioned before, this is the bread and butter of Trypillian archaeology, is digging plashatki, and there are thousands by now. And this is what you usually see on the basis of this rubble that you see in front of you. This is the reconstructions that are made, and the idea that we have about these houses, that they are very solidly built. They're there to last, not just to stay here for 1 or 5 years, that there is a major organization that is needed for their building, and again, they're built at the end. But we thought, well, there is no other way that these houses would be built, because they are built according to a very strong ancestral tradition. If you go to all of the Balkan, and not Balkan and Eastern Europe, I would say, Neolithic and Copperage, this is how the houses are built. This is a very strong ancestral tradition. And what was staring us in the face, and probably you all know it, but you can't really, it didn't really come to us till we started this experimental program, that the Trypillia house is actually a microcosm, an epitome of the surrounding landscape, which is the wood from the forest, the reeds from the ponds, the clay from the river banks, the weedy from the bushlands. Everything came together in these houses. And these are the estimates that we made for the construction of our experimental houses, which were actually smaller than, they were 2/3 of the real Trypillia house. And when we estimated this for what would have been, what the resources would have been for a quote-unquote real one, we also realized that it's not only the construction that takes a lot of time, but also the amount of time it's needed to collect the resources, other resources, the timber, the weedies, the reeds, for building these houses. And now multiply that by 1,500, because that's what we found. And again, I'm repeating it once again, because this is the shock that we had to take over very early on, is that we needed 10 more times timber to burn the houses than to build them. So the agricultural part of the subsistence of the Trypillia sites, which it's believed to be in place for 1,500 years, is a mixed farming, which consists wheats, barleys, and pulses. And this goes on and on like that till the last phase in Trypillia Sea, when the millet was supposed to be a dominant crop. I know that this is now disputed, but at the time when we were doing the project, that was very much the case. But that kind of farming was probably perfectly okay for a small Trypillia site, because there is low to minimal attention factor. You don't need really to do much. But if we are to feed a large population, then what you need to do is to either intensification, which is to say small plot, but you want to take as many crops as possible from there. And so you tend to the field as many for a long period and very intensively, or extensification, in which means that you really go out and that's how you get the required crops, the required amount of crops. Neither of which we found during our field walking. So we found only one Trypillia shared. So where is the veneering? What was happening that was not leaving any traces? Ooh. Yeah. And this is our pretty pollen diagram. We have a scientific model, of course, but this is for purposes of presentation. I think it's really much better. So this is the time when Nebylivka was occupied. And this is the tree. This is the cover, tree cover. And this is the amount of micro charcoal to show. And that's when you count the micro charcoal, that's you can pick up or capture various burning events. And this is the cereal. This is the amount of cereal that we had in the pollen core. And as you can see, if there was to be a big building project in the beginning, where is the deforestation that is needed? Where is we have to take the timber to build these houses? Where is the deforestation here? And if there was a huge burning event, so we need a lot of timber for that. So here. Where is the deforestation happening here? Where is the timber? Burning, nothing of the burning at the end of the site was appearing here. If anything, the burning was in the beginning of the site actually, and there are much bigger burning events around than at the site at the time of the occupation of the site. And again, where is the grain, the cereal grain that they're going to eat? And that's tiny amount for it. Again, it's probably enough to feed a population of 200 or whatever, but for the amount of peoples that we were thinking that would be there, this was not sustainable. Okay, now recapping the model. What is the standard model? So the houses were built at the same time or very close to each other, burnt at the same time or very close to each other. There was a massive permanent occupation, which was sustained by a village type economy. And there was only one type to achieve that, which is with a top-down hierarchical system. And our results were absolutely nowhere to support that. So what do we do? So of course we develop alternative models, which we call to a maximalist model, but the standard model is really the same. So it is either a smaller type of occupation or less permanent type of occupation. So the first model we call the distributed governance model, and that indeed is a permanent occupation, but in a much smaller scale. The assembly model sees it as a seasonal assembly that is happening seasonally, and the people who live there permanently are the guardians, called the guard of site. And the pilgrimage model is seeing visits to the site in a longer period. And again, there are people who are living there permanently, which is the so-called guardians. All these models had to fit. They had to account for 4 absolutely crucial criteria. So the number of the houses, or whatever houses we built and built, like a Lego, if you wish, we had to, in the end up with 1,455 houses. 1/3 of those should have been burned, and the others should not have been burned. Again, think of processes of burning and building. Whatever the effects of the burning and building of houses, it should not have produced a huge environmental impact, because we're not seeing that in the pollen diagram. And of course, we had to stay restrained with our 200 years of duration of the site. So starting with the distributed governance model, it postulates that 400 houses were permanently occupied in Nebylivka, that with a maximum population of 3,200. They all were organized in extended social groups, which I call clans. And if there are anthropologists in the audience, please let's not fight over terminology. I'm prepared to immediately drop that. I really was putting it here to give a sense rather than have a battle of definitions. Is that clan or not? The crucial point is that these groups of common descent had members in the Belivka itself, but also in the wider landscape, and this is the key. So 7 to 10 houses were built and burned every year. And the way that the government, the running of the site was organized, that there was a 10-year cycle in which every year one of these clans will be in charge. And as a reward, as a perk to be in charge, so you make decisions on behalf of everybody. But that also meant that you have to feed, to support rather, not to feed, because they were small-scale settlements, small-scale husbandry, horticulture was there, but to top it up, the people living in the wider landscape, member of the same clan, had to contribute to the subsistence of the people living in the Belivka. And of course, the question is, were there that many settlements around that site too, in the wider landscape of the 100-kilometer catchment area? Yes, there were. The assembly model is entirely seasonal, so we introduced seasonality in that in the Belivka, and was happening for 1 month per year. It was really a very intensive period of very intensive interaction, and it was really a major event of the year. If you're archaeologist, that's your EAA. If you're a musician, that's your Woodstock or your Glastonbury, whatever. That's the one you want to be. This is the thing that structures your life. You're looking forward to that one wants to happen. In terms of spatial development, it developed. It grew as a cake, as you can imagine, as in segments. And because, again, don't forget, we had to account for 200 years, we had it in generation of development. So various things appearing in various times, which we call generation. And that peak in generations appeared in the third, the peak of occupation appeared in the third generation. And the variability that we are accounting, that we see in the plan, is because there is a tension between the identity that you acquire when you go on this site, and your local identity, where you come from. Now, for the big other, I have to organize yet another seminar. So the one thing that I'll say about the big other is that it's an overarching integrative principle, which is only valid as long as you believe in it. Okay, so this model is rooted in the Trypillia big other, and richly and the pilgrimage centers like Belivka is where these shared rituals and ceremonies are concentrated. Obviously, the interaction will be not so intensive as in the assembly model, but it was important in the regional for the regional integration as well. The building, spatially again, of that site is very front-loaded, which means that in the beginning you have huge operation, but also that's an opportunity to attract a lot of participants and obviously to gain a lot of fame about this site. And this model actually explains a lot of the features, a lot of the planning features, and we just helpfully showed you here that the processions may appear along the radial streets or between the circuits or these entrances. So there is a lot to suggest that there was some kind of ceremoniality to that planning. Right, you'll say, okay, why do you need 3? Why don't you go with 1? What's, make up your mind, say it's 1. Well, the problem is that each of these models has its weaknesses and its strengths. So the weaknesses are in yellow, that I shouted to you, and the strengths are in blue. The rest we think is kind of neutral. So we really, really didn't feel comfortable with any advancing any of this. Maybe with the future, when we have this seminar, we have more conversation, we published a book. Perhaps we will be able to move forward and to drop one of them. But for the time being, I don't feel really in a position to claim that one is better than the other. Okay, now we are almost there. This is a shameless advertising. This is the book that came a couple of months ago, and it's open access. So really what I'm doing now is just really scratching the surface. And if you're really interested, you can find a lot of details in that book. So it's for free, just go there, click, and together with ADS, with the Archaeological Data Service data, you can have a full picture of what, if you want data, there is data. If you want interpretation, there will be interpretation. There is a little bit for everyone, for everything. So I will, better like that. So the top is the place where I live and where I'm giving this seminar from. The bottom is the place where I was born. Both are cities, and they have absolutely nothing in common. And everybody's happy for both of them to be cities, despite the fact that they have nothing in common. And this is Durham on the top, Sofia on the bottom. Durham has a cathedral and it's a city. Sofia is the capital of Bulgaria, so therefore it's a city too. So when it's come for the present, nobody's having a problem to use different criteria for defining a city. But come the past, we want to have one criteria that defines all the cities all across the world. So what I would like to invite you to think is to introduce the same flexibility for the past. So this idea that the criteria in which we define sites should be contextual is not new. It's not new. It has been in 1938, a famous sociologist, Louis Wirth, suggested that we have to look for contextual criteria. But unfortunately, that has been overlooked, and some other of his ideas have actually taken root into archaeology. And if you now scour the archaeological literature, what you will see is three major definitions of city. That will be Child's definition, which is the kind of a checklist with his 10 criteria. You will see the sociological definition of Wirth, which says that the core definition of a city is a relatively large, dense and permanent settlements of socially heterogeneous individuals. And the functional definition of Michael Smith, who sees urban settlements as centers whose activities and institutions, whether economic, administrative, or religious, affect a wider hinterland. And also you can see a combination of these, basically trying to make sense of what people in front of them. Right. If you use these kind of definitions, Nebelivka falls through the cracks. There is no way that's going anywhere near that. So what I suggest instead is to use a relational approach. And this relational approach argues against, very strongly, against idealized notion of a city. And as the word suggests, we have to look for sites in relation to each other. That will make sense to decide whether something is a city or not. Going back to Nebelivka, I'm speaking of relations between sites. This thing here is a quote-unquote normal Trypillia site, okay? And how is, whatever you do, your daily routine, you go into your fields, you do your pasture with your animals, you talk to your friends, how is, whatever you do daily, or weekly, or monthly, or annually, how is that comparable, whatever you do here, to what you do here? And if that's the critical mass of Trypillia settlements, because this is probably 80% of Trypillia settlements are with that size, okay? And if they are, if that's the critical mass, what is this then? What is this? How is this the same? And how is this Neolithic? And when I say Neolithic, I'm referring to this unfounded, in my view, immediate equation that Neolithic means a village way of life. So Nebelivka will make sense only in relation to the preceding and the contemporary sites of the forest steppe, Ukrainian Forest Steppe. And the scale of operation and the intensity of the social practice, whatever's going on, and its centrality is what really makes it to stand out. So if I want to you to take one thing from that talk, is that megasites cannot be considered a very large examples of small sites. That will be as if to say that aircraft carriers are simply bigger version of yachts. Apart from being on water, they have absolutely nothing in common, and this will be really a mixing of categories. So, in comparison with small Trypillian settlements, megasites are so different that indeed we can call them cities. And by cities, I mean this is a modern analytical construct that we people, scholars, create with hindsight to look in the past. So in that book that I've just advertised, and I'm not going go through them because otherwise you'll never read that book, I'll just point you in the direction that I've developed these 9 days and not criteria. These are characterizations. These are not exhaustive. You don't have to all of them. They have to be more, they could be less. This is just a suggestive list in which you can actually compare in terms of relation between different sites. So for example, this is the site of Grebeni, which is 4 hectares. So how is the built environment and the formalized space in that small site comparable to that one? What is the kind of ceremony that you can do here and you can do here? Is that comparable indeed? What is, for example, the population heterogeneity, which is to say what kind of different people, different category of people you can see here in 200 people, let's say, here, and how many were living in Meganetskoy? Or what will be the, what kind of specialist skill workers you will have here and in here? Think of what is the of what you can find on one or the other. Size indeed matters, but I cannot stress enough that when I mean size, I do not mean in absolute terms. I mean what size entails, scaling up. And I firmly believe that upscaling living, it's really transformational on personal, community, and network level. If your habitus is to live on 1 hectare site, what happens when you're going to live in something which is 200 times bigger? Think of that. I mean, I had the reverse experience coming from the hustle bustle of Sofia to live in the village called Durham. Shock. It took me a lot of years to get used to that. Upscale living, of course, has positives, negatives, and kind of neutral aspects. And just 2 of the positives is that there is obviously increased pool of people. And of course, there is a much wider range of expertise. The negatives, of course, that there is a difficulty in communication and interaction. Do I dare mention in the condition of global pandemic, disease as well? And of course, they're neutral, like more people mean that there are more resources are needed, and that probably will entail some more cooperation. Right, this is the last but one slide. And I do not do justice to that debate, and that deserves a lecture on its own, but I obviously don't have time for it. So this is a long-running debate, which was initiated and fueled by the research energy of Ronald Fletcher, who absolutely insisted and eventually succeeded to put low density occupation in its rightful place in the urbanism debate. And then there's a spin-off of that debate is confronting an emerging set of sites that fall off entirely of the scale of the normal settlement behavior. These are anomalously large sites. And we have been greatly inspired and influenced by these debates. So what are these in few words? So there is this notion that when a city starts as a compact and then grows, and when it grows, density drops, that is kind of a phenomenon which you can link usually with industrial, with the cities in the industrial age. And what Ronald Fletcher has been arguing very convincingly is that a process that happens much earlier, and it is valid for all big agricultural sites. And this is how he demonstrates this very beautifully. And of course, the original diagram will have more of this here because that goes in time. And here we are. The Trypillia is right next to the Iron Age orbiter with the African Yoruba and the Great Zimbabwe and the New World Cahokia and Chaco Canyon. So low density cities are now recognized as such, but they have an important characteristic that they really last for much shorter period than their high density counterparts. And if in Australia wasn't such a ridiculous hour, my dear friend Kirili White probably would have been in the audience, and she would have probably have filled us in about this amazing class of sites, and she reliably informs me that there are 219 of them these days. And why did they appear or disappear? What is their place in the overall settlement development? What is the investment to build and maintain such sites? What is their sustainability? These are questions that I'm looking forward to see in Kirili's PhD, which will be hopefully soon out. Right, there we go. Good. So I hope that I opened the door. I cast doubt to you, and you can start thinking, maybe these sites are probably not as permanent as I previously thought. And we offered 3 alternatives, and we know that perhaps that's, you wanted one definitive answer. I'm sorry, we can't give you that, but at least again, that invites you to think in a different way. And low density urbanism is now a recognized global phenomenon. And in that terms, we can probably see that the seasonal Trypillia megasites can be considered as low density urban sites, but only if you follow the approach that I have suggested. Thank you very much. And these are the acknowledgements. And thank you for staying for so long. Sorry if I overran.